is Monica Perez back with a returning guest, a hero, the hero of the hour. We're here just in time to celebrate some great victories with the great Joni McGary of no mandate, no questions, no compromises. What happened this week? Tell us, Joni. And how are you? And thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for that lovely intro. I love your intro music, by the way. What happened this week? A lot of colleges dropped mandates, and I think they used the end of the emergency as cover because it's not like all of a sudden there is something different in the air, right? Or not in the air. But college mandates have been dropping like flies over the past couple of months and several, many this week. But I need to say that there are about 400 that remain. And some seem like they're walking them back in slow motion, like Princeton. They make like little changes to their website, but they don't announce. Same with Penn. But my son's school and the school that I'm organizing an event at, Dartmouth College, dropped yesterday. Dartmouth and Columbia, I think, are the only two Ivies that have totally dropped. And it's hard to say.
Yeah.
Pardon?
Do you think that your work there was an influence on that?
We will nobody ever really knows because you're not privy to the decision making. I will say this, that if there was no resistance, right? If there weren't thousands of people resisting or writing letters or making their voices heard, they would do more and faster, right? So people can say, well, it's just a coincidence that the mandates were dropped, but I don't think so. I think if there had been no resistance at all, I don't think it would have been, they would have just rolled right into the next one without any hesitation. So I do think that activism and raising our voices makes a difference, particularly at Dartmouth, because this event, which we'll talk a little bit more later, is being, we're bringing the conversation right to their doorstep. And I say we, I'm really just working in sort of an assistant role with some Dartmouth alums. But very exciting news. And even though it's a little too late and there hasn't been any mea culpa, the harms are stopped now. For kids coming in as first years, they don't have to get this shot. So it's great news.
So tell us about this event, if you would. It's not, because I saw Dartmouth written on the flyer, but it's obviously not a Dartmouth sponsored event. Are you going to get are you going to get sabotage like that federal judge at my awful, my shameful alma mater?
But you're not proud of that?
Not proud of Stanford Law School for inviting it's just bad manners. You invite someone and then heckle them like the authority itself heckled him. That's kind of crazy.
Well, it happens a lot at schools. That happened to be a particularly egregious example. Well, how this event came to be, a Dartmouth alum from 2000 named Michael Koss, he just was looking at the mandates and he felt that they weren't sound, that they weren't helpful, they weren't useful, and they could be perhaps harmful. And he didn't think that they were right, that they were ethical or medically necessary. So he just wrote a very well documented letter to Dartmouth, and you can find it at openlettertodartmouth.com. And he sent it to the college, and he did get some engagement with them, but not as much as he had hoped, because his hope was that they would drop the mandates after they saw all of the actually great evidence that he brought to them, which is very typical. You think you're going to bring these people the data. You're like, yes. Then they're going to say, thank you. We didn't know, but they don't.
Right.
So anyway, so he sent them that letter, and he decided to send it to 20 other people that he had been in a fraternity with, that he hadn't talked to in decades. Right. And one guy wrote him back, and this guy is named Christopher Dreisbach. And it turns out that Christopher Dreisbach himself was severely vaccine injured from the COVID-19 vaccine. He was a practicing attorney. He had been a recruited college athlete, a man in the fullness of his life, in his prime. He has kids. And he took the Pfizer vaccine and didn't feel well after the first one, but because there has been so much suppression of the actual clinical data, doctors just didn't know. They don't know if you come in with symptoms that maybe it's a reaction to the vaccine and you might not want to take the second. So he was very injured, and that led him to do the great work he does now. He is the legal advisor for React 19. So he and Michael got together and said, we need to have an open dialogue and we need to invite Dartmouth to the table. So what they did is they decided they wanted to put up a roundtable discussion at the college, including panelists from Dartmouth who would support the mandates. And then they knew of me through Twitter because I do a lot, I've done a lot of posting and I've done a lot of advocacy in the college arena.
I
So
can't
they got
believe
in
you're
touch.
still on Twitter.
I know at some
It's
point I won't be.
amazing to me.
Why? Because I'm old?
No. Well, you're wise. Start with that, and that will get you thrown off. But because you say stuff that,
Oh,
Courtney Turner, she just commented on something that I had posted about the vax, and she lost her account. And I didn't think it was that big a deal at all. I think it was like a database thing. I've gotten YouTube videos removed before they were even fully uploaded if
wow.
people were talking about the vax. So I feel like since like Megan Kelly retweets you, you're gonna have a little bit of cover in plain sight.
Well, she just liked my hat. I did a hat, a
Well,
riff
she
on the
knows you
gulls.
exist, and
Yes,
she
that's
would know if,
true.
somebody told her you stopped existing, she would know, she would understand who it was. So that
Yeah, I've
matters.
been lucky. I haven't had, I haven't gotten in trouble on Twitter. So
Amazing.
maybe I'm not quite over the target, but I think I am. Anyway, so they found me on Twitter and they got in touch and they said, let's put this event up. So long story short, I'm kind of going into too much detail. They wrote a letter to Dartmouth. They invited them to send 3 panelists. They said because the intent is really an open and robust discussion. But Dartmouth, as of this date, has declined to participate. But we are holding it at the Dartmouth-owned Hanover Inn, which, if you've ever been to Dartmouth,
Hmm.
it's a small college, and it's not. There's a quad where you go to small college, but
I've
there are some
recruited
those who.
there. I think
Oh,
I might have stayed at the Hanover
it's
Inn.
I love
Yeah,
the Hanover Inn
yeah.
actually, and it's Dartmouth owned. It's right on the south side of the quad. So the event is going to be in 2 parts. And stop me if this is too much detail,
No, I
Monica.
like it. Yeah,
I love being on your show. It's
I love
so
it.
pleasant.
I'm
Um,
fascinated.
so it starts at 3:30, and the afternoon panel was underwritten by a couple of generous donors. So we've been able to make that free to the public, and we've reserved a block of seats for Dartmouth ID holders because we want to get as many Dartmouth people in the seat as possible. And then we have general admission, which is completely sold out at this point. And it starts at 3:30. Kim Witzek is our moderator. She is an incredible drug safety advocate. She has, you should have her on. You can find
Oh,
her at
absolutely.
kimwitzek.com or Woody Matters. She is really well versed in the FDA process and the potential harms of drugs, particularly when side effects are not made known to the public and when the drug companies and the FDA know of them, but they don't disclose them or they, continue to keep them suppressed. She is our moderator. And then we have panelists Martin Koldorf, Asim Malhotra, who's joining us by Zoom, Brooke Jackson, who's the Pfizer whistleblower. I'm not going to go into detail because most of your viewers probably
Yeah. Well, I've
know
shared a
them.
screen with her on Union of the Unwanted, which basically all of my viewers always hear because I put it through my podcast feed. So she hasn't been a guest on my show, but she's definitely been on my feed. So people have heard her, and some of these other, a lot of the other activists, I do end up having the luxury, the privilege of being on a screen with them, even though I don't know them personally.
Yeah, she's terrific, and then Joel Walskog, who is the co-founder of React 19. He's an orthopedic surgeon who can no longer practice because of his vaccine injury. He is so eloquent on this topic, and Dr. Sandy Ryder, who is a decades in practice, Vermont, Harvard-trained medical doctor, who is one of the founders of Physicians for Informed Consent. So that's the panel. That starts at 3:30. That's going to run maybe close to 2 hours. And then we got a surprise this weekend. Robert Kennedy Jr. will be joining us. I got a text on Saturday night saying that, he wanted to attend. And we're thrilled because, it lends such an interesting perspective. And he won't be there in the capacity of a presidential candidate, but it'll be on the heels of his announcement. So he will be talking for about a half hour on the topic of the pandemic response. And then following that will be a donor reception and a dinner to benefit React 19 with Aaron Siri, who's the keynote. So it's just going to be an amazing day.
So if someone were wanted to see the panel or watch RFK's speech, is it going to be available?
Yes, it's gonna be live streamed, and
Oh, live.
unfortunately,
Excellent.
I we don't have the live stream link. It will be on CHDTV, and if you want it, I'll get it to you for your show notes if that's a thing, or,
That's helpful.
excuse me,
Yes.
you can, email us at info@openlettertodartmouth.com and just ask to be put on the live stream list, and we'll get that
So
link to you as soon as we have it.
so if I wanted to tweet it out while it was happening, people would not it's like you have to register or something?
No, not for the live stream. The
Oh,
live stream is completely public, you don't have to register. We are organizing college student watch parties for
yes.
it. There are a
Excellent.
couple of, like, amazing volunteers who are doing that, and, we really wanna get this, information across the country, and somebody might say, "Well, why?" Because the mandates are over, COVID is over, let's just move on, but the conversation is more important than ever because if you look at the language of the colleges that are dropping, what they do is then they strongly suggest that everyone stay up to date. There's just a roll right into the next thing. And there's no reflection and no like, hey, let's get together and do a postmortem on this and let's look at the harms of these policies, et cetera.
Well, I was looking at what calls the school calls a declination form. You're declining. They have a mandate, but you can decline it.
Right.
And thanks to your help, I learned right away that this particular school that does not refuse anybody's request at this point. So they didn't drop the mandate, but they will not refuse requests. However, when I looked, like they have a flu vaccine requirement.
Mm,
I mean, that's
yeah.
just not gonna happen. Like,
That's
you know?
that's becoming increasingly common, and the concern about that, Monica, is that, at some point, the flu vaccine is gonna be an mRNA vaccine if they have their way, right? Because they want everything on this platform because it's so elegant. Um, and that's very concerning because these products do not have a really great safety profile, and all
So
of
why
the
do you
c
call it elegant? I mean,
pardon
I
me?
understand that elegant is a term of art, but why would you call it elegant? Because it's, just such a
There
fancy new product, or is it elegant in a specific way?
Well, I feel like as like a drug delivery system, it's elegant because it's like a plug and play. So you don't have to go it's very quick to market in
Oh,
terms of
yes.
okay, what's the code? You get the mRNA code. You get it done and you're off to the races. So it's just it's a platform that if it were completely safe, if it had some long-term safety data, um, that's what I mean by elegant. It's
Yes,
easy to get to market. I mean, look how fast they got to market with these products.
that just
It's a
cracked a code for me in
yeah,
that I remember I did a lot of work on Event 201 when it was happening, which was October 2019. I think was aware of it by February 2020, where they were basically explaining what this novel coronavirus pandemic is. Are you familiar? You must be familiar with the
yes,
Event
yes, I
201. Yeah.
am.
Okay.
Yes.
So there were 7 calls to action that were on the Johns Hopkins website as a result of Event 201. And one of them was to have like a vaccine stockpile that could be quickly customized and distributed for a specific new pandemic or whatever, and I was like, "How is that possible? How could you possibly like, you have to, like, cultivate stuff to make a vaccine," and they were completely aware of what the future vaccines were gonna be like. That's what they were preparing for.
Oh, yeah, because this is basically it's a code, right? They're assembling like an RMA, mRNA instruction to your own body to then produce, like in this
Yeah.
case, the spike protein. So
That's so scary.
you become a little factory to produce this protein, and that elicits an antigen response. Um,
Do you know why they chose the spike protein? Did you, in your
I
reading, come across that?
I don't, but it seems to me, I mean, it's such a toxic
Why take
protein,
the thing that causes
right?
harm when, and from what Dr. Yeadon, I think it was, said, like, it doesn't matter
What
where you
part?
take the segment. It doesn't matter at all as long as it is part of this a part of the thing. If it's attacked, it'll,
Right.
neutralize the antigen.
Well, yeah, I don't know, and that's really
Yeah.
outside of my lane, but what I
Yeah, no,
can
I
tell
I
you,
I know, I know.
yeah, what I can tell you about the spike protein, which is interesting, is it turns out that Dartmouth College, along with the NIH and Scripps Research, which you probably know, they are joint patent holders on a technology that stabilizes, and it says, okay, a method to stabilize corona spike proteins for use as a vaccine antigen. So what it does is I'm not sure if it's for the mRNA thing, but
Yeah.
what it does is it makes the spike protein from a coronavirus in your body be the form that elicits the highest antigen response. So it's very useful in vaccines, and it's been used in the coronavirus vaccine. So that is why Moderna paid $400 million to the NIH recently, which was split, by the way, with Dartmouth and Scripps
Wow.
Research. And there's also been a revenue stream from other vaccines that are non-Moderna. So and also, like, Penn has technology. They've raked in, I think, almost $1 billion from these vaccines, and that in itself isn't a terrible thing. It's just that, you know, if you pull the camera back, an institution should not be mandating a product from which they get a revenue stream.
Yeah,
At the very least, not that they're
that
making a lot of money off their college students. It's a
I
small
read
population.
I used to love Michael Crichton. He was a doctor and a writer, and he actually could get to the bottom of all the science of it and everything. And one of the last things that he wrote, if not the last thing he wrote, was called Next. I think it was called Next, and it was about patenting genes out of a person's body that the person themselves does not have a gene, does not own the patent to it. You could own the patent to a person's genes, and he brought out in that, it's crazy, and I'm sure it's true right now. He brought out in that the way like government pays for the research in the university, and then like that money that we have invested gets absorbed by the university, or it was like the university corporation kind of continuum where they end up being the patent holders. They have incentives to push this stuff. We actually paid for it. And then I take it to the next level and say, like with the vaccine, then we're not only a lot of our tax dollars goes towards subsidizing purchasing the vaccine. We are literally forced, or at least severely coerced, in
Yeah.
actually consuming it. You're not even allowed to, like a normal thing you could consume and throw in the garbage. Like, I didn't really want this. I bought it to be nice. I'm throwing it away. They literally watch you put it under your skin. And to me, there's something so pathological about that. And that there's all the damage done, and there doesn't seem to be any recourse compared to like where the flu vaccine in the 70s had whatever 25 injuries and it was taken off the market, and
Right.
60 minutes was made about it.
Right, right. And that would never happen today. There would be no 60 Minutes about it. And you're absolutely right. There is no recourse because I think it's since the 80s, any vaccine on the schedule has complete financial indemnity. And the coronavirus or the COVID-19 shot has indemnity. You can't sue. Like if you get injured from this
Right.
shot, you are on your own. You can't sue the manufacturers. You can't sue the person who gave it to you. You can't sue the
Yeah.
person who mandated it on you because of the PrEP Act, which covers all COVID countermeasures. Now, maybe the legal landscape on this will change. There are a lot of people trying very hard on that. But yeah, I don't think people realize that vaccines are a very highly protected class of
Yeah.
products.
And the PrEP Act made it worse. And then another thing that I think people these because we have such robust regulatory regimes and such a really like a tort system that is notorious for bankrupting companies and destroying doctors, people have this false sense of security. Same thing with like libel laws or truth in advertising. I think all of those regulatory things that we've gotten used to as coddled Americans has made us the most gullible people in the world, because we assume that anything we're consuming, whether it's media or a product or advertising, it would be true. If it's not true, or if it's not good, or if it hurts people, it'd be sued out of existence. You'd be aware of it. Somebody would have
Somebody would have
taken
told
it.
you.
Yes. And this is a case where what people don't realize, and the fact that something is free from liability is a terrible moral hazard. I mean, terrible moral hazard that you should just refuse it. I think India at one point was like, we're not taking your vaccine stuff over here because you refuse to let us, you're demanding this liability, the insulation
Indemnity.
from liability, and you can't, we won't do it. And then of course, now they have their own, and I guess it probably is just as corrupt, but internally they don't care.
Yeah, I don't know what happened over there. I do know, I do remember reading that the contracts with governments were just so punishing for the government that, basically the companies had, full reign liability. And even if they infringed on somebody's intellectual property, the companies weren't responsible. So yeah, it's really, I think the good news is I think this has brought a lot of people into questioning, the system. Like if this product has these problems and the media isn't covering it and your doctor's not telling you and people are forcing you to take it, why aren't we asking questions? Why can't we talk about it? And I think that raises the alarm with people. And I think it's waking people up to be more curious and to start asking more questions. Not enough, not quickly enough, but that's like a little silver lining.
I 100% agree with you that they and people are like, "Oh, who's they? Who's they?" Well, I will tell you that
They,
they in Event 201 was Johns Hopkins, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Health Organization, and a whole slew of corporate and governmental actors, including the CDC of the US, the CDC of China. Those three were the hosts, but the rest of the World Economic Forum, these were all involved in planning how this thing would roll out. And I feel like they are, people don't realize what's behind it all. And if there were not, I think they wait and see what the reaction is, how much they can get away with. I think in some regards they get away with or got away with maybe more than they had expected, but also there was a limit and they did kind of pull back because they could have just kept going until there were vaccine mandates. If you look at what was happening in Austria, they did actually mandate it where they would start taking money out of your bank account if
right.
I
Yes.
understood what the plan was correctly. And if they got that far in Austria, they didn't get that far here. They got that far in Austria, and I don't know where that stopped, but I feel like they do push as far as they can, but they also have to read the tea leaves.
Right. And I think that's why it's so important that people stand up and do something. I mean, and I despair some days and I think, oh, it's not, it doesn't make any difference how many letters I send or how many times I speak up or whatever, but it does make a difference because like I said at the top of the show, if there was no resistance, they are forced, they meaning policymakers at the college level, at the government level, at the pharmaceutical boardroom level, they are forced to take into account that they have to create enough space so that the people that are against these policies will at least be placated. And that sounds like a small thing, but it is no small thing because if you didn't have to do that, you would not have any space for future activism and future accountability. I mean, we're holding space for that to happen.
Well, one thing that I always find really important, and I don't know if I've spoken to you since I started talking to Anthony Raimondo. Did we talk about who Anthony Raimondo is?
Oh yeah, yes,
Do you
and
know
I
him?
yes, I do. I mean,
Yeah, okay.
I was on Buck's podcast with him
Yes, yes, I
at
know
the
he was
very
inside. Okay,
beginning.
alright.
Yeah, he's a
So,
hero.
yes, one thing he did, and it seemed like such a simple thing, and he claims that for whatever reason, it boggles my mind that I said, "Why didn't all the lawyers do what you did?" Which was apparently, if I understand it correctly, at least in Fresno, when they issued, like a blanket, businesses have to
Right,
close.
they're locked down.
Yes, the business would have a right to a hearing, and because the courthouse was closed, and I guess they hadn't had it, like, all Zoom ready or whatever, they didn't get their hearing, so they stayed open, and all he had to do was just request a hearing or show them how to request a hearing, and he would do it free for any business who asked, and they stayed open. And I said, "Well, why didn't," I kept calling for that. I was like, "Where are the lawyers?" Like, "I don't know what the process is, but somebody's gotta start the process." And he said he just felt like there was a stigma attached to doing stuff like that, which to me is just preposterous because the whole thing seemed like a joke. Like it seemed like a plot, maybe because I had known about Event 201. I don't know. But I was horrified that people were just self-chilling lawyers who are used to fighting. But so he did that. And I've always felt like what he was doing and what other people have done, like you, is keeping the process going. If you don't if you don't use the process, it shrinks up. Either people aren't aware of it, or it's a de facto, like if you acquiesce completely, if you do not fight back, there is a kind of reliance element to, if you, it's even like if somebody builds a fence on your property. I mean, if you let it go, eventually they own a little bit more of your property. Like
Yeah.
you have to correct these wrong things, or people say, well, why didn't you say anything? And I feel like with the process, especially, you have to really hold the lawyers have to hold the judges really responsible for making good decisions. And you want to rush to get those decisions made by lawyers you can trust, instead of controlled opposition stuff who might be trying to set precedents, give a weak case so that the other side will win, and set a precedent that maybe isn't a great precedent by legal standards, but it's a victory for the people who would encroach on our rights in a way that might have been adjudicated differently if you'd really fought the good fight.
Yes. No, you know so much more about the legal system than I do. I think just topically, I've been really disappointed in, I mean, well, first let me say there are some amazing lawyers who have gotten
Yes.
right into this fight and who have worked tirelessly pro bono or for very little money,
Yeah, Brian
to,
Festus, we the Patriots USA. I mean, I think he quit his job and just like works full time on
yeah,
this.
we're doing this.
People are pro
And
bono. Yeah.
Aaron Siri has just been, a hero in this arena. Kevin Barry in the Northeast, Jim Rodriguez, Walter Mendenhall, and I know in Dana Weaver in New Jersey, many attorneys have really done a lot of great work, but by and large, they've been sitting on the sidelines, and the courts have not been great on these issues either. And doctors, it's the same thing. I mean, where are these people? And I think a lot of them are they're asleep.
You
And they
think?
don't, yeah, well, at first I think we were all afraid.
Yeah.
We were all afraid.
I
We
wasn't.
didn't,
And
well,
only because I read the
because
Event 201. I was shocked when people started getting sick. I
you
couldn't
didn't think it
believe
would
it.
really happen.
Oh no, I couldn't believe it. Someone was like, it could be like as bad as smallpox. I was like, I think this thing is completely made up. And then as soon as the vaccine rolled out, was the first person I met who had gotten vaccinated like the day before. I got sick like the next day, and I knew it. I was like, holy
Oh,
crap! Like that stuff could be crawling out of your face right now and showing up. But all the people I knew, all of a sudden it just like started happening where people were getting sick like crazy. But it was only after the vaccine rolled out. But I did
huh.
realize then that it was real, and I was super sick.
It's funny. I knew, like, I was afraid it in the beginning. And then I think the minute somebody said the word vaccine, I thought, oh, here we go. And
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly, but I think that's when I realized that something wasn't right, you know,
Were you
and
suspicious of vaccines before that at all?
no, gosh,
No,
not
yeah,
at all.
I
No,
didn't I
no.
never really
And
thought about it too much.
never thought about it. And, my kids on the schedule, jab, 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 didn't think twice about it. I don't know. Like a lot of people say, oh, you're an anti-vaxxer. I'm like, I don't I don't even know what that means. Like, am I an anti am I an anti-Fiat driver? Because I don't wanna drive a Fiat, like, ooh, it's
Oh,
just
that's funny,
it's
yeah.
it's so patently absurd, but, I never thought about it. Now I think about it, and one
Yeah.
of the things that I wanted to mention on this, in this discussion is, the COVID vaccines were the thing that was the bridge too far at the college level for a lot of people. Like, you didn't see this big of a movement when like they had to get meningitis or now the flu is going to be an issue, but in California, as you probably know, there's the HPV
That
mandate.
one I did stop short of.
Okay,
Hat tip to, Higher Side Chats for having a couple of gals who wrote a book about how the trials have the adjuvants in them. The
right,
control has the
the
adjuvants
control,
in
right,
them. And as soon as they said that, I was like, "Oh,
not a control,
that's
not a control.
obviously and totally untested thing, and I'm completely not doing it." I bought the book for my pediatrician.
Oh, the HPV. Yeah, I know
Yeah,
that.
and he told me
Yeah,
I was, he said, "Well, people used to be afraid of werewolves too."
right. No,
I was
I
like, "What? This is a book that has information in it, like, I mean, I'm not afraid of a werewolf, like, what the fuck are you talking about?" It was so crazy. I was like, "What are we what?" So
but you should know in California that there's a bill, it's called AB 659, and it's been amended, but they were going to put it through and require that any student going into 8th grade must have the HPV vaccine. And so it didn't pass, and then they are amending it. And now the amendment is that college students going to any of the state California schools must get the HPV vaccine, and there are no religious exemptions and only medical
boy.
exemptions.
Boy,
So
and when you read
whatever
about
you,
that one, I mean,
yeah,
I really feel like it's like the opposite. Like it actually from that I mean, I didn't do the research, but I remember listening to that like it's been it causes cancer. Like it's been shown in some cases to actually increase the risk of cancer.
yeah, I don't know
Yeah,
anything
I mean,
about that data. But what I will say is you don't have a choice if it's mandated. And you will, and also you, and that's see, like that's my thing. Like whatever I think about these products, whatever I know or don't know about them, there are requirements if you're going to have a medical mandate, which I think you should never have. But let's just say there's some situation where you'd want a mandate. You've got an Ebola like thing that's spreading rapidly, and you have a product that will stop it in its tracks, highly effective, highly safe. Then maybe you discuss a mandate, right? Because you got to save humanity. None of these conditions has been met in
okay.
any of these things.
There were literally t-shirts in Africa that said Ebola is real. They had, like, billboards and stuff, so there was a lot of suspicion about what was really causing Ebola in Africa, so I would even say
Wow.
sorry,
Okay. I was like,
I don't wanna
Annie.
blow
Okay.
up your
All right.
but I'm just like, I because this is the thing, like, you can keep scratching the surface, and when your examples, uh, aren't, like,
Of things you
there's
think
no
are bedrock true.
yes, and I
Yeah.
feel like that a lot of that what that means then is sometimes even the most basic assumptions about a narrative that we've been told, even they need to be questioned because there may not even be a single great example. But I will say for the Gardasil, a lot of lesbians out in California, did they have to get the HPV? I mean, what's the transmission mechanism?
Interesting. I
You know
don't
what I'm
know.
saying? Like, you're saying it's
Yeah.
not a choice, but what if you're just like, "Look, I'm at 0, I'm a totally celibate person. Like,
Right.
I am at
Doesn't
absolute
matter.
0 risk of that as, it's I would you
It's
have to"
it's called the cancer prevention bill or something.
Mhm.
And again, it's my issue has become medical freedom and medical choice, which we are increasingly not getting, for
Right.
many, many reasons. And I think that this particular mandate at college students and across the military, everywhere, medical staff, personnel, it, it tramples, it has set a precedent. It has set a precedent. And it's gotten us used to being made to be afraid and then taking a product that, in this case, has no long term safety data, you know?
Yeah, and the stepping stone to some of the more, like, broader based technocratic devices. I just did a show today earlier with Ian Davis, who is he just writes great articles, great books. He's in Off Guardian is where I usually read him, but he the thing I talked to him today about was the central bank digital currency
Ugh,
and that yeah, and that's going
horrifying.
it's going to be based there's 2 ways to do it, but obviously the way they're gonna do it is gonna be based on a digital ID, and I think the Vax was the prototype to that, having, like, don't touch money was, a COVID stepping stone to
Remember the
that.
money short? There was all this big
Yeah.
change shortage. Do you
Yeah.
remember that?
Totally
Yeah.
bizarre, and even the stimulus, the loans that they were creating, they were saying there was, a financial crisis that couldn't be dealt with in the normal way, and it introduced, according to Ian, and I verified it in other sources, a, a totally unprecedented paradigm shifting move by the Fed, where instead of letting commercial banks lend money to businesses and people, the Fed would buy assets, stocks and bonds, I guess you would call it, probably from other entities and just directly infuse the money into the system without any commercial bank, stepping stone, resting place. I don't know what, supply and demand mechanism. I really don't know. But the point was that seems like a step towards the CBDC, which would be money going directly from the Fed to your credit card. And I just feel like so many things that came out of this pandemic were really meant to feed into our technocratic future, and
Mhm.
and the digital ID is the foundation of it. And I would say the vaccine mandate is the biggest justification for that they use. So it's
Well,
not
and
just your medical freedom; it's
right.
all your freedom.
It's everything. And I think that there were some really, for them, great pilot programs like at, the UC Irvine, they had what was called the ZOP Pass. So kids had all their information in their phone. They had to take their temperature. They couldn't pass from here to there. They had to be up to
My
date. They had
kids
to
did all
test.
that.
Yeah. Oh
All my
gosh.
kids, even at the private schools. As a matter of
Wow.
fact, the public school. So my son who has Down syndrome goes to public school. My other 2 kids went to 2 different private schools, which is unusual, so they went to, like, these 2 competing high schools, and the high schools have totally different reputations, they have different administrations, their policy was in lockstep. As a matter of fact, even some of the language in the emails were
Wow.
identical, which so I'm certain it came from that. I think I might even have seen evidence of it coming from, like, this network of independent schools, I forget what it's
Hmm.
called, but it's like the private schools are part of that. But the public school, and I might have mentioned this to you before, it's funny because California has that history of like parents advocating for the rights of kids. Like as a libertarian, I would never go into a public institution that I don't think should exist and self-righteously demand things. Like I've completely neutered myself because I don't believe in the institution of public school.
But you're
Yet
using one.
yeah, well, because my
Yeah.
son has Down syndrome, and
Right.
because of a variety of policies, there are no private schools for people who have Down syndrome anymore. It was the integration thing. When they started trying to integrate children with Down syndrome, they shut down the schools.
Mm.
And it's just kind of like when JFK said no more, I think he was probably well intentioned, but it was a terrible idea, no more orphanages. And then like the abortion, that happened to coincide with the legalizing abortion not that long after. And Downs kids have like an almost 100% rate of abortion because there's no orphanages to put them in. So I could not find a private place to put them if I wanted to yet because the laws here, the way people have advocated for their students in the past, like they have to find a place for a kid like him. And
Mhm.
I feel like they were very there's a lot of resistance to when Newsom was suggesting the mandates and stuff. We got an email from our principal saying anyone who correctly fills out this form will be given an exemption, which was
Oh,
early in the process. It was
that's
amazing.
great.
And I feel like there's something about the culture where people
Somebody
feel like
stood up.
they own the public schools. And yeah, so that was much better than the private schools where it was a terrible, terrible experience for that. But we had the passes, the health passes. My son had to take, I think, like 100 COVID tests at least.
Well,
I mean, it makes me kind of want to cry, but I was one person who I totally respect people's choice to make those compromises under complete coercion. If you were being judged by St. Peter, like, if you want to commit a mortal sin, you have to be full consent to the will. You cannot be under duress. So people make these trade-offs and I don't hold them morally culpable for it. And who am I? I didn't have to do any of that.
yeah, you were the, I think this is off the topic, but I think you were the one when you get to the pearly gates and they said, you're like, well, I chose the lesser of two evils. And you're like, wait a minute, you chose an evil? Like what?
Yeah, right. Like ding, ding, ding. Like
But I was
loser.
thinking, I was thinking about the testing. It's not only just they're under EUA too, right? So you have this
Wow, are they
repeat,
really? Yeah,
yeah,
no, I
yeah,
did not
yeah.
like that.
And not that it matters because, even if they had been quote approved, I mean, I don't think those tests weren't developed for, somebody to take 100 of them,
I know.
right? And so you have
Yeah,
this
I
repeated
know.
exposure to your and so, there's this one young woman named Phoebe Lou who was disenrolled from UConn. She got an exemption. It was very confusing to her that she had to keep testing or something. They told her she didn't, and then they said she must. And then when she looked at the test kit, it said experimental use only for DNA collection on the test kit. Like, she has pictures of it. She's brought it to the board there. She's like, I'm not taking this. And then she did all this research on the test. And, I really admire her. She really stood up for herself at great
Yeah.
personal cost.
Yeah.
But yeah, this has been a horrible ordeal, particularly for captive populations that are either in a school, whether it's
Yeah.
grade school, high school,
Yeah, it's
colleges.
very low risk, very high cost, very low risk. There
Yeah.
would never, you had to really coerce them with very high cost. And I'll tell you what contributed to my approach to this is that I'm the youngest of 9. I was raised,
Wow.
my father was a bit of a rebel and he was a very staunch libertarian, always, I guess, traditional conservative, classical liberal, like those were normal, expressions that he was. It didn't seem as crazy then, but he was really against he didn't want me to, so I was telling a story earlier today. I was basically at the top of my class in high school, more or less, and it was public school, wasn't like the hardest thing in the world, but he encouraged me to drop out of high school. And I was very academic. Like it really did not make sense for me to drop out of high
Did you
school,
do
but
it?
yeah. And
Wow.
yeah,
Why did he want you to drop out? Because he just
he
didn't want
just
you to get.
thought it's a way it was really slightly more complicated in that he absolutely did not want me to go to college. He thought there was absolutely no reason to finish high school if you're not going to college. And I said, "Well, what if I could get into Harvard?" And he said, "Man, they'll make you a socialist, but at least you would probably get a good job."
This is a great
And
story.
so I went to the guidance counselor and I was like, she encouraged me to apply to the summer program at Harvard. And I got in, but by the skin of my teeth, and it was $1,000 and there was no financial aid and I didn't have $1,000. She probably would have paid it out of her own pocket, to be honest. But I said, look, is it easier or harder to get into Harvard than it is to get into the summer program? She said, it's a little harder to get into Harvard. And I said, well, I'll probably go in there and fall on my face. I go to this public school. Those people are probably going to, outshine me. And then I'll prove it's like
No
that old thing, like
way.
remain silent and be thoughtful and speak and remove all doubt. It's like, so I'm not doing it because whether I go or not, there's no way I'm getting into Harvard. And since that's the only place that, I could kind of win the argument that it was worth going, I'm not doing that. And since I'm not going to college, I'm out. And really, she was devastated, Miss Burroughs, because I had a bunch of older brothers and sisters who all dropped out of that school, but they were stoners. And I was like very good a student. And she felt it looked like a failure on their part when I left. So
Wait, so
later, yeah.
did your dad want you to go to work?
He wanted me to be an entrepreneur, do some
Right.
kooky real
Yeah.
estate investing, whatever, just like work for myself and all of
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Um,
But anyway, go on
s-
with your story. This is
yeah.
fascinating.
So,
That's why I
so
like being on
I,
your
it's
podcast because,
funny. Yeah. It's
like,
a
I get to
funny,
listen to you.
unusual story. They're very sweet, but so my mother was not as comfortable with that as my father. She was pretty upset. And then,
What did
so
she
I,
say in your mother voice?
oh, she said, "I don't know, George. She did so good on those tests. I think that maybe I think it might be worth it if she would go to college." So, but I didn't, and I moved out. I left home, and we had a little religious dispute. I went. I stopped going to mass, and he said, "Well, you," because I lived a debauched lifestyle. And I said, "Well, I'm not going to mass." And he said, "Go to mass next Sunday or move out by next Sunday." And I was like, "Oh, you did not raise me to take an ultimatum like that and lying down." So I was gone. I was out of there. And so we
Wow.
had a bit of a rift, but I definitely never felt any compunction about not going to college. And then after a year of just floating around and trying on this entrepreneurial thing, which didn't really work out, my my
And what are
I
you, like,
was
18 now? You're
yeah,
18
I
years
was
old?
not quite. So I started thinking, "Oh, are we drinking?"
Yes, it's time for the no mandate, no
Oh.
grony.
Oh, good. So I'll
You're
just
the
tell you my stories. Then we're just gonna have some fun.
yes. Go
Okay,
ahead.
so I'd been holding off. So I was very sensitive to, like, I was always the youngest in my class, and I felt like you don't want to be left back. There was a stigma to that. So I was out of school for a year, and I talked to my mom. I mean, I probably talked to her once in that entire time. I'd left, moved away,
Wow.
and she she said, "Well, I talked to Miss Burrows, and she said there's this community college program, and somebody went to Harvard from there. So if you came back, she could get you in that program, and they'll get you into Harvard, and you'll be the same age as your class." So I was like, okay. So I came back, and I went to the community college, and I did transfer to Harvard as a junior, and they
I
paid
know
for it.
that story about you.
Yeah,
I love it.
yeah, that was cool. But my father was so anti everything establishment. And for many years after that, I became an investment banker. I went to Stanford
Right.
Law School and business school, and I had nice clothes, and I felt satisfied. I felt like I'd achieved something cool. Briefly. I mean, I didn't have that corner office, and I'll never look good in a pencil skirt. Like, my absolute fantasy did not come true, but I did good enough and well enough. And so, I and now I'm like full circle. I'm like, he shouldn't have told me to start a business. He should have told me to buy a farm. Like,
Right.
we should have just bought a farm. And I should have learned something. I learned how to do something, whatever. And I just decided after that that you can't really force a young person into like true enlightenment, especially in our terrible culture. So the one thing I did was I sent them to this really offbeat, very small, super religious Catholic school, but very like, they did a lot of music, like they did things that had value. And they'd learned Latin. And I was just like, I don't care if the kids go to Latin mass, but like, if they learn Latin by the time they're in eighth grade, that's more than I ever learned in any class by the time I was in eighth grade.
Yeah.
So I felt that the cultural surroundings of the kids would play into my values without me having to force them
Right.
to derail them. And I also did not want to neuter them as effective members of society. So there's the Benedict option where you can just drop out completely and get your farm or whatever, but that's like kind of it could be a permanent choice, and maybe we need to stay and fight. So I gave my kids the choice, and I was like, you can, I don't know what to tell you. Like, I think money, while it might not be green, it will still like make the world go round. And if you have no way of getting money, you might not really be able to.
You might not have choices.
Yeah, and you might, you might be fine, and you might have kids who are fine, but are we really here to just exist? I feel like you in that but I'm not as active as you are, but I feel like we we have to fight for what, for our rights, rights of party. But how you're going to fight that fight? Like, I don't feel like I've had different views of that along the way, and I just didn't want to impose that on my kids. And for different, so my son chose to not be vaccinated, but stay at the school, even though there were restrictions involved, like the
Mhm.
testing. My daughter
It takes a lot of courage.
wouldn't do that. But now she's turned around, so she's super excited. She's hoping that they lift the like booster mandate from her school. So, they come around, but it's a terrible like health risk and stuff. And I was fortunate enough to be on the Union of the Unwanted when there would be naturalists there and doctors there. And in the chat, you would just ask them, like, I know somebody has to get vaccinated. It still makes me kind of cry a little bit. And, what can I do? And
No,
they would say,
yeah, and I wanna, like, just take I can understand why that's an emotional thing. I mean, take a moment and think about this. I know someone who has to get vaccinated. Like, we've gotten so used to a vaccine mandate, like, somebody who has to put a
yeah,
needle
no, it was very
into their
painful.
body, and it feels like such an aggressive attack on our humanity.
Yeah.
Um,
I was
so
ready to fight to the death. Like, I was literally like praying to Joan of Arc, but it did not work. It was not good.
yeah,
But a lot of people gave really good advice about, um,
mitigations and
ice. Yeah, ice was a big thing, and I found out later from a stewardess who she had COVID, and the vaccine mandate came down, and she had to get the vaccine like within the it was the
oh, yeah,
craziest thing.
yeah, they did that at colleges too.
It
They would say, 3
It
weeks
was
after
terrible.
your last positive test, you need to get boosted.
Yeah, and when she went, the nurses, I guess, had some experience with this, and they were worried for her. So they just for hours had before, during, and after put ice
Mm,
on the injection site, and I felt that validated. That was advice I'd already gotten and already employed, and, there were some other things like taking the immunity prophylactics like quercetin and zinc.
mhm.
There was something else that I thought was, it was like liposomal glutathione, but I don't know if that gets absorbed well. But there was another one that was just absolutely important. Was it like Advil? Like there was something.
I have no idea
Yeah,
because
there
I
was some, but this is not your caliber stuff. This is stuff that people were just, you know, natural medicine practitioners were suggesting might work, but wouldn't probably not reach the kind of level of proof that the people in your circles require before they make recommendations like that. But
I
but
don't yeah,
I felt it was something I could do, and the ice I felt was validated.
I don't feel like I'm in any circles. You always
Well,
like
the
you always
people
like
you host, I wouldn't want them tainted by things that I say because of your association, with
um
with the more casual approach to like how you do stuff at home.
well, no, but I think that, what it reflects is that it reflects an oppression. It reflects an oppression where you are put in a position of, and some people feel very desperate. They didn't want
Yeah.
their children to get these products. They
No, it
didn't
was
want
terrible.
themselves to get these products. And, I'm really fortunate. I had a choice. I don't work for
Yeah.
anyone. I
Yeah,
was
me
able
too.
to not get it. And I remember suffering over that. I remember my son just finally just, Mom, just get it so you can go
Ah!
places,
Oh
right?
my
He was just
gosh.
like, whatever.
Ah.
But and he took the J&J when the mandate came down because I did not know that all we
Wow.
had to do. I didn't know that we could
Wow.
just get a religious exemption. And
Yeah.
here's the problem with that whole paradigm. We were talking about it today in our meeting. Are we going to run out of time, by the way?
Yeah.
We
Yeah, I don't
really
think so.
okay. We were talking about that in our.
This
We
is
had
our
like a
time now. We got like the business out of the way, and we
okay.
can even just keep this live and local and put the first 45 minutes in the
Wait, I might
feed.
have some things to. I had some notes I wanted to make. But
Oh,
anyway,
okay, go for it.
but back like we had a huddle today with Kim to talk about what we really need to cover in this panel. And now I've lost my train of thought. Um,
You
oh
you
yeah, so we
didn't
were
know
talking
that
about
you could just do an exemption?
right. We were talking about exemptions, and I said the problem with saying that well the college mandates, but hey, they grant all religious exemptions, so don't worry about it. The problem with that is that you're saying you give approval to a system that it requires you to opt out. Now, not everyone asking for a quote religious exemption, whatever that is sincere. So you're asking a certain amount of population to protect their health by being disingenuous. That is an insult to somebody's character
Yeah.
and to the way you think. And part of the and this is so endemic in the college leaderships now is that they are teaching these people, and I'm kind of veering off here, but they're teaching these young people by example, these people who are going to be leaders in business, leaders in government, leaders in social movements. Like it or not, these are the people getting trained to lead our country, whatever that's going to look like in 10 years or 5 years. But they're being trained by example that we can take away your rights, your right of choice, your right to informed consent. We can coerce you and propagandize you. And that is how you will then think it's okay to lead people. And so it's just
That's a
bad
good
all the way
point.
down. And I think of that a lot. And it's it's very troubling. And I think particularly and people say, well, they don't feel sorry for college kids, right? Because, these are elite kids, because they're going to college, they can just stop, they don't have to go, whatever. Do you want to live in a country, in a society that requires you to get a higher education, whatever you think of that education at this point in time, which I don't think very much of myself. I
Right.
never thought I would say that. I'm like, I was
Yeah.
all about the Ivy League, everything
You're
else.
very
I
well
mean,
educated. So that is something that I would make fun of, like my education and stuff. And I had a few people call me out and say, "No, you did get you," even if it was just by virtue of being in the circles of people who know how to articulate
Mhm.
things and think, and, so there is real value in some of that.
Well, Naomi Wolf writes so eloquently about when she got to Yale that it was, and I could never do it justice because she's such a good writer, that it's this magical club that
Yeah.
all of a sudden you look around and I mean, I grew up on a street called Pigtail Alley,
I saw the
you've seen
painting.
the picture,
So
and
gorgeous.
I did not paint that picture.
I thought you did.
And, my mother didn't graduate high school because she was from a very poor family, and so she had to quit and go to work as, a 16-year-old, and I was the first person to go to college, whatever. And and so it is this, like, you feel like you've arrived when you get
Yeah.
into you get on those places. But anyway, my point is that people don't feel sorry for college kids, but do you want to live in a country where you go and get, this next step of education, you work really hard to get there, and they say, "Hey, welcome, thanks for coming. Roll up your sleeve. You're going to get this injection that you do not need because this population never needed the shot. That may harm you because lots of kids are getting myocarditis or neurological disorders, and these things were well known in the clinical trials. But oh, by the way, we didn't share them because we wouldn't have either unless Aaron Siri represented some scientists that said, FDA, you have to turn over these documents that belong to the
Oh,
public, right?
okay.
I don't know if you're
I
aware of
I
that.
read the FDA, approval documents, and it had the phase 5 trial talked about myocarditis. So when people say
Right.
it wasn't in there, I'm like, I was well, I showed my kids. I was like,
I
"This
mean,
is what that is."
the post marketing survey from Pfizer
It was when they went from the, emergency use authorization
to
to
the approval.
approving
Oh, that was
Comirnaty.
right.
That
Which
was
by
long
the way,
after?
oh, was when they did the okay, when Pfizer did their trials, they took that trial data and they submitted it to the FDA for approval, for
Right.
emergency use approval. When a drug is submitted to the FDA and is approved, those documents belong to we the people. There are documents. We should be able to FOIA them and get them. So, some scientists and doctors said, we want those documents. So they FOIA'd the FDA. And the FDA said, well, we can't give them to you for 75 years. It'll take
Oh,
us
yeah.
that
I
long,
remember that
right?
one, yeah.
So
Mhm.
Aaron Siri
Yeah.
sued and got them.
Yeah, yeah.
So
I do remember that.
and so you can look at those documents and they knew about a lot of adverse events in those trials. And so they were not disclosed even at the time of like April 2021, where these kids were starting to get mandated to take these products. So you have a myocarditis risk, you have neurological problems. And then also, there has been widespread menstrual disruption. There was a study of sperm donors in Israel that suggested that there was sperm count depression, suppression, and sperm count motility problem. Now, people will say, oh, those things resolve. Well, maybe they do, but maybe they don't. So,
Right.
why would you wholesale mandate a young population of reproductive age to get a product that there's even a hint of a question might impact their fertility? I'm not saying it will, but the fact that we don't know and they don't need the product
Right.
and it doesn't protect their professors because it doesn't stop transmission.
Yes.
I mean,
That's
the
the crazy
whole,
part. Now that was
yeah,
the thing that I had seen in when I looked at the original trial data. Now it didn't say, or the original emergency use authorization stuff from the FDA. It didn't it didn't actually state it that way, but if you
because
read the numbers, like you just read the numbers and it shows you like this many people got it in this group and this many people got it in this group, and you could just see that it didn't stop
it
transmission.
didn't do that. It
The
wasn't really
numbers were
trialed for that.
it
And,
was
and
yeah.
yeah, and the justification for mandates and the justification for telling everyone, keep getting these shots, was based on that, right? Excuse
Yeah.
me, and it didn't work,
No.
right? So you had colleges that mandated in April of 2021. By summer that year, they were bringing back masks to campus because
Anyway.
they were having outbreaks. And then, so that what do they do next? They don't say, well, I guess that didn't work. They say,
Right.
hmm, maybe we should have a booster. So let's
Yeah.
give this shot again. I
Oh, I
mean,
mean, in my observation, totally anecdotal, the widespread, distribution of the vaccines was always followed by a spike in
yeah.
the illness. So,
So,
but yeah, if you go back and look at those numbers, I mean, they were not compelling of having any effects
mm,
whatsoever. And there was so much funny business with that. But regarding something you said earlier, uh, with religious exemptions, I agree with you. They have absolutely no right to require you to assert that you don't want to do it and give a reason. Like that's
right,
outrageous. The only reason I would ever give in the religious stuff, which I had the occasion to kind of fill forms out and stuff, is that it was against my conscience to subject
right,
my child to that kind of a risk. I was like, you can call it a medical exemption or not, but I, in good conscience, and that was God's honest truth, could not consent to that. So, also, I knew a woman, a listener who I love. She was pregnant with her 5th child, and her husband was a soldier, and he
mm,
I mean, they were in deep, and there was absolutely no way he was gonna just be able to drop out, and so he had to get all vaxxed up. She said he just slept in a different room for, until he was shipped out, and then he was pretty quickly shipped out. Like, he had to do it, there was no delay. And it was just terrible for them, but I understand it, I understand why people did that like that. It's not bad. Whatever choice you made, like, is that's not the bad. The bad is that
you were
we
forced
are,
to make that choice.
yes, in this country, and that network, like where we started out from the beginning talking about the network of the universities and the corporations and the government, like and folding in the power to tax, the power to enforce, like Austria was considering, all of those things wrapped up together, and it wasn't quite inescapable because I escaped it, but
But
I couldn't
it
do it.
was inescapable for many, many people,
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
I know
right,
a
right,
lot of
right. Yeah,
right,
that's
I mean, and so what do you do if you have to put food on the table? What do you do? Whether you want this product or not, and, yeah, like, the point you made about, like, it's government funded, and the money goes to pharmaceutical companies, they develop a product, they make bazillions of dollars from this product
yes.
because the government that approved the product is now mandating the product, and
And
corporations.
subsidizing its purchase on
Right,
top of
right.
the
And
research.
so my question throughout this whole thing has been, where is Antifa? Like,
Yeah,
where is, I mean, what
right.
is fascism, right?
Yeah. The
Like,
corpo governmental continuum. Yes.
yeah. So it just blows my mind that people did not in that sphere wake up. I don't understand how the left, and
Yes.
I don't like to use the word left
I
because
know, I
I don't know
know,
what it
I
means, but I
know,
don't
I know.
understand how those previously were anti-corporate interests, were anti-war, were pro-freedom of choice. What happened to them? They just fell right into the pharmaceutical embrace, like with no
Yes.
questions asked, and it, I, I still don't understand it.
So the
Um,
basket, so so there's the basket of deplorables that
oh
Hillary coined.
yeah, I
This
couldn't believe I was one. I mean,
Yeah, I know,
I
I
was
am
such a
too.
lefty liberal Planned
But
Parenthood,
yeah, everything
you
in my,
know?
I don't own everything in the basket, but if I'm in a basket, that's it. But the other basket, I coined the basket of irrationals. Because in that basket, because that's LA, that is the basket of LA, and they will tell you, like, I have to accept everything in this basket or I'm not allowed in the basket, which isn't true for the deplorables. And what is in that basket is self-avowed communism, uh, radical, abortion position where,
Yeah,
like,
what
you
is the
just
abortion what's the position
yeah,
like post-delivery? What's
dude,
going,
it's pretty close. I saw that I voted
and I'm
against.
speaking now in my only, like, I'm not in any kind of official capacity. I don't have a position on this,
No, 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 and
but,
even the abort I would never even talk about because I knew it was, like, such an emotional issue, but it's so out of hand out here. So there was a constitutional amendment proposed out here where
state
abortion.
constitution.
Yes, there's
Yeah.
no chance that abortion was ever gonna be illegal in California no matter what Roe versus Wade said.
No, no.
I think it was a prototype for the federal amendment that they're probably gonna propose,
Yeah.
and it was
You guys
something
export everything.
was so everything from not smoking to, like, that I should have known. When I moved out to California, they banned smoking, and I was like, "I gotta get back to New York," and then they banned smoking in New York.
Did you
I don't
smoke?
I don't smoke now, but I did smoke
Yeah.
then.
I used
aplenty.
to smoke too, and I'm so
Oh,
glad
yeah.
I mean, every
Yeah,
New
me
Year's
too.
Eve, I'm like, "Wow, I'm so glad I don't have to quit smoking."
Yeah, and
It's such a
I
horrible
love
thing.
not smoking. I love it, but
Right.
I didn't
But
realize
anyway,
how
so they
easy it
banned
would be.
smoking
So
because they're
so
like, "Monica's moving in,
they
let's
do.
ban
Oh, that
smoking."
was so unfortunate, the whole New York thing when they did that. But the constitutional amendment, which just passed, even though I actually, don't even believe in voting, I got off my butt to vote against it, was something so simple that it seemed obvious, but it was basically, you have the unrestricted right to abortion, which on demand. So it kind of was like it didn't say anything at all, and by not saying anything at all, I forget the exact words, so definitely don't quote me. That's not it, but the implication was from people who analyzed it from an anti-abortion perspective was that you could have an abortion at any time during pregnancy. People could come in from other states and get it, and that it would all be paid for with tax dollars. So and the constitutional amendments that had more words in them in some other states were actually somewhat like more restrictive. But I felt like the California's one, which is like old school, like in our early U.S. constitutional amendments, they're just a couple of lines, and like the later they got all super wordy. There's just a couple of lines, but they're very scary lines. But that basket is communists, the self-avowed communists, extreme abortion advocates, and uh, vax Nazis in the same
Yeah,
basket of irrationals. Like they have the hands off my body bumper sticker, and I just like want to put a vax with a line through it and just
right.
glue it right next to it.
That's exactly right, and I just wanna make that point about the, incredible disconnect and hypocrisy. Whatever your position on Roe v. Wade, and is it Dobbs or the ruling that kicked it back to the states, whatever your position on that, once that happened, colleges were very vocal about, "Oh, medical choice, bodily autonomy." They would put out statements, they were up in arms like colleges, and these were the very same
Yeah.
colleges that were mandating vaccination, and you can't have it both ways, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, if I believe in bodily autonomy, I have to I think abortion is a very tricky issue.
Yeah,
It's
I get it.
so
Yeah.
nuanced and very tricky, and,
It can easily
um
come down to just a religious question, like of
right,
soul.
right, exactly, and I think that that's a very hard thing to litigate, but all of that aside, the people that were so bent out of shape about bodily autonomy were the very same people who
Mhm.
were coercing and shaming and forcing somebody to give up their bodily autonomy for a product they did not need, that didn't protect the community. I can't emphasize this enough. Didn't need, didn't protect grandma or the old professor of chemistry, and has
Put them at risk.
potential bad
Yeah.
side effects,
Yeah, and
and
unknown, still unknown.
unknown long-term side effects.
Still, and I
So,
think we're seeing some of it. They're gonna cover it up, but I feel like we
well,
can
because
see some
it's
trends.
because of long COVID now, which I'm
Well,
not
I
saying
think there's
doesn't
cancer
exist.
trends. I think
Yeah,
there's some these weird, radical, strange, unusual cancers that are diagnosed at stage 4 out the gate.
I'm
That's weird.
seeing,
But
yeah,
this is why I
but
call them the
again,
basket.
I don't know the data on
No,
that,
I
so I
know you
can't
don't. I'm
comment.
sorry. I
No, it's
fast
okay.
and loose. You're
No, it's
serious.
I love how fast and loose you are.
Oh
I
my god.
just, I try to really, really stay in my lane, about that, and I think, and that's why the argument is so simple. It's so simple. These kids don't need it. They shouldn't have been made to get it. Um, period. The period. Full stop.
So let's I don't like to it is serious, and I don't want to impugn your credibility in any way. So I suggest that we wrap up the
Okay.
broadcast portion of this conversation before I finish my cocktail. And
Okay. But I want to make sure I
but I
got
yes, I
everything that
want
I
to make
wanted
sure you
to.
get everything. So let's get back to
Okay.
business, and then we can wrap it up.
Okay, great. I want to just say a couple more things about the Dartmouth event. It will be live streamed. If you happen to be in New England, there are still a very limited amount of dinner tickets available. You get in to see Aaron Siri. Robert Kennedy Jr. will be there. It's a small venue. And if you really want to, pony up, we have a donor cocktail party for $1,000.
Is he going
It's
to be there?
Yes. But that's not really the point of the event, but
Oh,
a lot of
sorry.
people wanna no, but a lot of people
I'm
wanna
like,
come.
really? I not for me. I'm
Are you gonna
asking for a
come?
friend,
Oh,
quite literally.
fly in, that would be fun. No, he is our very special guest at those events. But the most important thing too is you will get to talk to the panelists and be in community with people who are curious and who are learning something. And the Hanover Inn has good food and drinks, etc. But if you want to come to the event, just go to our website. Are you going to put that in the show notes?
Yep.
Okay. And so you can still get a ticket. If you
Well, is it
can't
the
make it,
React 19? Tell me what it
it's
is, and I'll put it in there because
it's
I looked at the
react19
flyer. Yeah.
react19.org/dart DART C19, and that will get you there.
That did not work for me. Now I could try a different browser, but I would double check that. I will
Okay.
edit this out, but,
All right.
um
Anyway, I'll get you the website, but so tickets are still available until like very early next week unless we sell out. Um, but if you can't make it and you want to support the effort, there are two ways you can do it. You can sponsor a student. We're trying to get as many students in seats as possible, and the way that we feel we can do that and give them the benefit of hearing Aaron Siri speak is to sponsor them for dinner. So you can buy a sponsor.
nice, yeah.
There's an option, sponsor a student. And when you do that, we will put up your college banner on a wall to show that it's not just about Dartmouth. So if you wanted to, well, we
I
have a
could
lot of Harvard.
represent. I could throw a Harvard and a Stanford one up there.
You
Wouldn't that
could, yes.
gall them?
Um, so that's what we're going to do. And we have a bunch of students now who have been underwritten. We'd love to have more. So sponsor a student, or you can just make a full out donation.
Can you give us a
And
number on the sponsor student?
we're heading toward two tables, which are 20. Um,
Okay.
it's a small, it's a small venue, really,
Yep.
but we'd like to get as many students at the dinner as
Right. So
possible. I
maybe
mean, we
get,
have.
a group together and uh pitch in.
Yeah, or just sponsor a student.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean
Okay.
to, if that's in your budget.
Are you saying
We will.
$20 or $20,000? You
It's
said sponsor a
$300.
table
Oh, a
at
table.
20. You said to
Oh, no,
we
no,
sponsor a
no, no,
table,
no,
and I was
that's not
like,
what I
I've been
meant.
to events where a table is like 20,000. I don't.
No, a table is three
So I was
thousand
just like,
dollars.
oh,
Oh, no, that's not. I misunderstood you. A table is $3,000, which
right.
is
Okay.
$300 a ticket. Some of that is tax deductible. The proceeds go to React 19.
That's
But yeah,
totally
we will
reasonable. Yeah.
we
I've
will
been to,
accommodate as many students as we
yeah, that's
possibly
great.
can.
Yeah. Awesome.
So that's a great way to help the cause and to start waking up students. We really want to get the movable middle there so that they can open their mind and learn something. We're very sad that Dartmouth won't be there to support their mandate position. However, we're going to go forward with the discussion because we feel like it's crucial that we do it.
Well, I am definitely going to sponsor at least 2 students so that I can have my 2 alma mater represented
Woohoo!
on your wall, which I think will be cool. Maybe you'll get like every single Ivy League school will have
Oh, I
a
think we will.
your logo up there. So that's awesome. I will definitely contribute. I will check that out. We will put everything in the show notes, which is monicasdeepdives.com will be where the show notes are for the show. We'll put them up as soon as we can. The event itself is April 26th. Did you say it starts at 3:30 p.m. Eastern?
That's at 3:30. Yes.
And if people wanted to stay alert to the live stream, which I will tweet the link at, is the live stream starting at 3:30, or is that
Yes.
just when your personal activities? Okay, great.
It's live.
Nice.
We probably
This
won't
is
live stream.
exciting. Like the
It's
RFK
very.
thing is like,
Yeah.
wow.
Well, and also just the panelists that are coming, the amount of
Yes.
and I have to tell you that these people are, I mean, they're all volunteering their time. I mean, we're paying for them to get there, but everyone is working without pay for this because they believe in the cause. These are esteemed science. I think I didn't mention
Yeah.
Todd Zawicki's also going to be on the
Oh,
panel.
no,
He's
you
a
didn't.
Dartmouth alum. He's a constitutional law professor at George
Nice.
Mason. He sued George
Oh,
Mason
George
over his
Mason.
natural immunity.
Ah,
There are so
Et
many
tu,
expert
George
people.
Mason, et tu. Because
That's
George Mason
exactly
is
it.
like a libertarian thing.
Right, but
The
they
man
were
was the Bill of
mandating.
Rights. Yeah, but George Mason is like
Yeah.
has a little nest of libertarians. And Mason himself was the one who is credited for the Bill of Rights.
See, you know everything,
Well,
Monica.
I know that, and that's outrageous that
They were
they should
mandating.
Ah,
All of these schools, all of these schools that are mandating, it's
bad,
outrageous because
bad, bad.
it defies logic. It's the basket of illogicals. Is that
Well,
what you call it?
irrationals, the basket of irrationals.
Irrationals.
It defies logic for the information that they're willing to acknowledge. It's totally logical when you follow the money.
Oh, yeah, because that's something we haven't even covered. But yeah, there is a lot
Yeah.
of money being made here. But I think also at the university level, to be fair, when these things first rolled out, they were scrambling to try to make their campuses as safe as possible.
Yeah.
I will give them the benefit of the doubt. They had to shut down. They had to do like crazy stuff because they believed that you need to socially distance, quarantine, and all that. When the vaccines came along, I do think they saw it as a way to get back to normal. And they also are very used to relying on public health data. They
Yes.
trust these
This was
institutions.
unprecedented.
Right,
Yes.
they trust these institutions.
Yes.
The fact that they still appear to trust them is very troubling to me.
There might have been changes at the administrative level because that's what I think about when you go to the hospital. Uh, every single person there is post purge. So all the nurses in the ER, I had to go to the ER for something. All the nurses were vaccinated, and anybody who wouldn't get vaccinated were gone. So when I
Right.
said no, they were pissy. And I was
Yeah,
like, they're like, you should do some reading. I was like, you should do some reading.
right. No,
You know?
it's the same in the military. It's really a litmus test. I
Yeah,
mean,
but
and
it's a sieve. Like it's already
right,
been applied. It's a caste
right,
system, and you're not you're no Brahmin. So I
right.
just
And
feel
then
like, yeah,
and that also affects decision making going forward. And it's what's been happening in universities for decades.
yes,
If somebody
yes.
conservative ages out, they bring in a liberal person, and so they have
Right.
all this diversity of immutable characteristics, of skin color, of
Yes,
whatever. I mean, they have all this diversity,
yes.
but they don't countenance diversity of thought, and this is
Right.
why we are in the mess we're in, because we can't have a conversation,
Yeah.
you know? And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to have a conversation that's reasonable and reach the movable middle so that we don't end up in this position again, where we take away
Yeah.
wholesale rights from people and propagandize them and make them, victims of this.
So, I agree, like, it's easy to let down your guard now that there's
Oh yeah.
some break in the action, but, I feel like your event, like, it's and what I meant by, like, the RFK thing is huge, is just because it raises the profile. That's really what I meant. I mean,
Oh,
and
he's
not
gonna
in
he's
any
gonna
way.
change. Yeah, he's
Yeah,
gonna change the conversation on the national
yeah.
stage. I mean,
Yes,
that's what's
yes. That's
whatever.
great.
Like, I don't even know his positions
Yeah, yeah.
on like a lot of the
Anything.
key issues that are very important to me. But he will change the national conversation if he is allowed to, the same way Ron Paul changed the
Yeah.
national conversation. Now, I think the media will try to shut him up. They will not cover him. They will do all the dirty tricks. But if he can get, if people can listen to him, it'll change the conversation. And we need that change of
Yeah.
conversation so that we can start asking questions about pharmaceutical interests, about, all of these corruptions.
And even if it's
I,
just one issue, it
yeah,
is arguably the most important issue of our time because it is a stepping stone towards this
yes,
totalitarianism
yes.
that will
It's a gate.
change our way of life.
Yeah, it's a
As
gateway. I
already.
didn't mean to get on my soapbox there, but
No,
it's
it's
been so
great.
it's been
Yeah.
so great to hang out with you.
No, it's hard. It's hard for I know you're very disciplined and I appreciate that because it's important. I mean, a lot of these people, their credibility is what makes them so powerful. And you really can't like be fast and loose with science stuff when they're fighting that battle in that arena only. And that's why I'm a little
Yeah.
loosey goosey, but you can't be.
No,
So
I try very hard to stay in
yeah,
my lane. I might have, like,
you are
slipped a little on this, but
not.
I've been under some strain.
Okay. Well, you'll
I
have to
get a
go
little break occasionally.
and listen back. We'll see if we will, maybe we'll just keep it on YouTube. But anyway, we will talk offline and I'm going to
Okay.
say goodbye. But you're active on Twitter. It's at Lady Spalding with a U 11. Is
Mhm.
that correct?
Yep,
At Lady
that's it.
Spalding 11. And we interact. And I think that's a great place to just stay in touch with what you're doing. And I'll also put all your links in the show notes at monicasdeepdives.com. And I thank you so much, Joni, for coming and
It's been
it's
my
just been
pleasure.
great. Yes, thank you. All right, I'll say goodbye to everybody. Thanks so much. You have been listening to Deep Dives with Monica Perez.